The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Willow Creek, startling Madeleine Turner from her thoughts as she stepped off the stagecoach that had carried her from Boston to this frontier town in the Arizona Territory. It was 1878, and the promise of a new beginning had led her here, though not exactly by choice. "Welcome to Willow Creek, miss," said the driver, handing down her modest trunk. "Mind yourself now. Town's lively today." Madeleine smoothed her travel-worn blue dress and tucked a loose strand of auburn hair back into her bonnet. At 22, she had expected to be married to her childhood sweetheart by now, not standing alone in a strange town with dust coating her shoes and fear clutching at her heart. The Starlight Saloon, she murmured to herself, eyes searching for the establishment her uncle had mentioned in his letter. The letter that had arrived just days after her parents' funeral, offering her a position at his business out west. The saloon wasn't hard to find. It was the largest building on the main street, its fresh paint and grand sign standing out among the weathered storefronts. Madeleine hesitated at the batwing doors, hearing piano music and raucous laughter from within. This was not the kind of establishment a lady from Boston should enter unescorted, but she had little choice. A man stumbled out, nearly colliding with her. "Well, look what the stage brought in," he slurred, his whiskey breath making her recoil. "Ain't you a pretty little thing?" "Excuse me," Madeleine said firmly, trying to step around him. "Now, don't be in such a hurry." His grimy hand reached for her arm. The lady said, "Excuse me." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. The drunk man's face changed, sobriety suddenly returning as he backed away with his hands raised. "No trouble, Price. Just making conversation." Madeleine turned to find herself looking up at a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. He wore a dusty leather vest over a simple shirt, a gun belt slung low on his hips, and a well-worn hat that had seen many seasons of sun and rain. "You look lost, madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Can I help you find your way? I'm looking for my uncle, Lawrence Turner. I was told he owns the Starlight Saloon." Something flickered across the man's face, surprise, perhaps, or concern, but it was gone so quickly Madeleine thought she might have imagined it. "Lawrence Turner's your uncle?" he asked. "Yes, I'm Madeleine Turner. I've come from Boston to work for him." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm Colton Price. Most folks call me Colt." He studied her for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Your uncle's inside, but before you go in, you should know Maddie, my dear niece." A boisterous voice interrupted them as a portly man in an expensive suit emerged from the saloon. Lawrence Turner's smile was wide beneath his neatly trimmed mustache, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Uncle Lawrence," Madeleine greeted him with a curtsy, relief washing over her. At least this part of her journey had gone as planned. "I see you've met our local lawman," Lawrence said, eyeing Colt with barely concealed disdain. "Sheriff Price has a habit of interfering in other people's business." "Just doing my job, Turner," Colt replied evenly, "making sure newcomers feel welcome in our town." "Well, she's with family now," Lawrence said dismissively, taking Madeleine's arm. "Come inside, my dear. You must be exhausted from your journey." Madeleine allowed herself to be led toward the saloon, but glanced back at Sheriff Price. He stood watching them, concern etched on his features. "Your uncle and I have different views on how business should be conducted in Willow Creek," he said quietly. "Be careful, Miss Turner." Lawrence's grip on her arm tightened. "Don't mind him. Come, let's get you settled." The interior of the Starlight Saloon was grander than Madeleine had expected. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting light over green baize gaming tables where well-dressed men played cards. A polished bar ran along one wall, and at the back, a staircase led to an upper floor. Several young women in revealing dresses moved among the customers, laughing and flirting. Madeleine's steps faltered. "Uncle Lawrence, what sort of establishment is this?" "The finest saloon in the Arizona Territory," Lawrence replied proudly. "Carts, drinks, entertainment, we provide it all. And soon, with your help, we'll expand even further." "My help? But what could I possibly—" "We'll discuss the details later," Lawrence interrupted. "For now, Betsy will show you to your room. You can rest and freshen up, and we'll talk business over dinner." A young woman with tired eyes and too much rouge approached. "This way, miss." As Madeleine followed Betsy up the stairs, She couldn't shake the feeling that Sheriff Price's warning had been more than just the usual tension between a lawman and a saloon owner. Something didn't feel right, but after traveling for days and with nowhere else to go, she had little choice but to trust in her uncle's goodwill. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Madeleine could see the sheriff's office directly across, and as she watched, Colt Price emerged, pausing to look up at her window before continuing down the street. "Will there be anything else, miss?" Betsy asked from the doorway. "No, thank you. Actually, what exactly does my uncle expect me to do here?" Betsy's expression turned sympathetic. "Mr. Turner doesn't share his plans with the likes of me, miss. But—" She hesitated. "Please, if you know something, just be careful what you sign," Betsy whispered. "Mr. Turner has a way with words and papers." With that cryptic warning, she slipped out, closing the door behind her. Madeleine sat heavily on the bed, exhaustion and unease battling within her. She had come west because she had nowhere else to go after her parents died, leaving only debts behind. Uncle Lawrence's offer of employment had seemed a godsend. Now, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. When Lawrence knocked on her door 3 hours later, Madeleine had rested, washed away the travel dust, and changed into her best dress, a simple green gown that had been her mother's. It was slightly outdated by Boston standards, but she hoped it would be appropriate for dinner with her uncle. "Much better," Lawrence exclaimed, taking her arm. "You look like a proper Turner now. Come, I've had a private dinner set up in my office." He led her down a back staircase and into a well-appointed office behind the main saloon floor. A desk dominated the room, covered in papers and ledgers, and a small table had been set with fine china and silver for their meal. As they ate, Lawrence talked at length about his business ventures, his rise from nothing to become one of the most prosperous men in the territory. Madeleine listened politely, waiting for him to explain her role in all this. "So, Uncle Lawrence," she finally asked as their plates were cleared by a silent server, "what exactly will my duties be? In your letter, you mentioned a position that would suit a young lady of good family." Lawrence dabbed his mouth with a napkin and smiled. "Indeed, my dear. I have plans for the Starlight Grand Plans. We'll be expanding, adding more gaming tables, a theater for performances, perhaps even a hotel wing. And for that, we need a touch of refinement. I still don't understand what—" "You will be our hostess," Lawrence interrupted smoothly. "The Starlight's lady of quality, welcoming our more distinguished guests, presiding over social events. Your Boston manners will add just the right touch of class." Madeleine frowned. "You want me to be a saloon hostess?" "Not just any saloon, the finest establishment west of the Mississippi." Lawrence reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "I've prepared a contract outlining your position, duties, and compensation. Very generous terms, I assure you." He slid the papers across the desk. Madeleine hesitated, then picked them up, scanning the densely written legal language. "5 years?" she asked, alarmed. "You expect me to commit to 5 years? It's standard, my dear. Building a reputation takes time. And look at the salary, more than most men make in these parts." Lawrence handed her a pen. "I've already arranged for a dressmaker to visit tomorrow. You'll need a proper wardrobe." Madeleine continued reading, a growing sense of unease making her stomach churn. There were clauses about living arrangements, behavior expectations, and financial penalties for breaches of contract that seemed excessive. "I don't know, Uncle Lawrence. Perhaps I should have a lawyer review." Lawrence's affable expression hardened slightly. "A lawyer? In Willow Creek? My dear, this is a simple employment contract, nothing more. Besides, where would you go if not here? You told me yourself in your letter that your parents left nothing but debts." The reminder of her desperate situation stung. Madeleine had indeed arrived with barely enough money for a week's lodging had she needed to pay for it. "I just signed the contract, Maddie," Lawrence said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your family. I'm offering you security, a position of respect. What more could a young woman in your situation ask for?" Put that way, it did seem foolish to hesitate. Madeleine took the pen, and after one more moment of doubt, signed her name at the bottom of the final page. Lawrence's smile returned instantly as he took back the papers. "Excellent. Welcome to the Starlight, Miss Turner. We'll announce your position at a special event next week." As Madeleine returned to her room that night, She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a terrible mistake. But what choice did she have? With no money and no other family, this was her only chance for a new beginning. She paused at her window, looking out at the now quiet street. The light in the sheriff's office still burned, a warm glow in the darkness. She wondered what Colt Price would think of her new position as the Starlight's hostess. Somehow, she didn't think he would approve. The next morning, Madeleine woke to a knock at her door. When she opened it, expecting Betsy, she found a severe-looking woman with measuring tape draped around her neck. "Miss Turner? I'm Mrs. Holloway, the dressmaker. Mr. Turner sent me to measure you for your new wardrobe." Before Madeleine could properly respond, the woman bustled in and began setting up her equipment. Over the next hour, Madeleine was measured, draped with fabric swatches, and shown sketches of dresses that made her blush with their low necklines and form-fitting designs. "These seem rather revealing," she protested when shown a particularly daring evening gown in scarlet silk. "Mr. Turner was very specific about the style, Mrs. Holloway replied matter-of-factly. "He wants you to make an impression." "I'm sure he does," Madeleine murmured, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the direction this respectable position seemed to be taking. After Mrs. Holloway left, Madeleine decided to explore the saloon in daylight. Perhaps things would seem less intimidating without the crowds and noise of the previous evening. The main floor was being cleaned by several women in plain dresses, a stark contrast to the flashy attire of those who had been entertaining guests the night before. A man was stocking bottles behind the bar, and another was repairing a chair in the corner. "Miss Turner," a voice called. She turned to see a tall, thin man approaching. "I'm Victor Simmons, your uncle's manager. He asked me to show you around and explain your duties." "Thank you, Mr. Simmons. I would appreciate that." Victor's tour was efficient but enlightening. The Starlight was indeed more than just a saloon. It housed a high-stakes poker room, private dining areas, and even a small theater space where performances were held 3 nights a week. The upper floor contained rooms for special guests, and the living quarters for the Starlight girls, a euphemism that Madeleine quickly understood. "And this will be your domain," Victor said, leading her to a small sitting room adjacent to the main floor. It was elegantly furnished with settees and armchairs. "You'll receive guests here, make introductions, perhaps pour tea during the day and champagne in the evenings." "I see," Madeleine said, though she was beginning to see all too clearly. Her role as hostess was to lend an air of respectability to what was, in many ways, a high-class gambling den and brothel. "Your uncle is particularly keen for you to charm our more wealthy patrons," Victor continued. "Men of means who might be interested in investing in the Starlight's expansion." "And that's all?" Madeleine asked pointedly. Victor's smile was thin. "Of course, Miss Turner. You are Mr. Turner's niece, after all. Your virtue is not part of our business model." The relief Madeleine felt was tempered by the realization that while she might not be expected to sell herself, she was certainly expected to be the bait that lured wealthy men into her uncle's web. As they completed the tour, the batwing doors swung open, and Sheriff Colt Price walked in, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright street beyond. His eyes found Madeleine immediately, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Turner," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I didn't expect to find you here during daylight hours." "Sheriff Price," she replied, conscious of Victor hovering nearby. "Mr. Simmons was just showing me around. I'll be working here as the saloon's hostess." Something like concern flashed in Colt's eyes. "Is that so?" "The sheriff probably has business with Mr. Turner," Victor interjected smoothly. "I'll take you back to your room, Miss Turner. Your new wardrobe should be arriving over the next few days." "Actually," Colt said, "I was hoping to speak with Miss Turner. There's to be a town social this Sunday after church. As a newcomer, she might appreciate an invitation." "How thoughtful," Victor replied, his tone suggesting the opposite. "But Miss Turner will be quite busy preparing for her debut at the Starlight. Perhaps another time." Madeleine opened her mouth to object. Surely she could spare a few hours on Sunday, but Victor's hand on her arm steered her firmly toward the stairs. "A moment, Mr. Simmons," Colt said, his voice now carrying the authority of his office. "I believe Miss Turner can answer for herself." Victor's grip tightened briefly, then released. "Of course, Sheriff. How rude of me." Madeleine looked between the two men, sensing an underlying tension that went beyond this simple interaction. "I would be delighted to attend the social, Sheriff Price," she said, making her decision. "I should like to meet more of the townspeople." "Splendid," Colt replied, a hint of triumph in his eyes. "I'll call for you at 10 on Sunday morning, if that's agreeable." "Very," Madeleine said with a genuine smile, the first she'd managed since arriving in Willow Creek. Victor's displeasure was palpable, but he said nothing further as Colt tipped his hat and departed. When the sheriff was gone, however, Victor's demeanor changed. "Your uncle won't be pleased," he said coldly. "You would do well to remember where your loyalties should lie, Miss Turner." "My uncle can hardly object to my attending church and a social gathering," Madeleine replied, lifting her chin. "It's perfectly respectable." "Perhaps," Victor conceded. "But the sheriff and Mr. Turner have a complicated relationship. Being seen with Price may not be in your best interests." With that cryptic warning, he left her at her door. Madeleine entered her room, feeling a mixture of defiance and concern. She had signed a contract, yes, but surely that didn't give her uncle the right to dictate every aspect of her life. As she sat by the window, contemplating her situation, she noticed movement in the alley below. A young woman, one of the Starlight girls she had seen the night before, was being roughly handled by a man Madeleine recognized as one of the bartenders. The girl's face showed fear, and though Madeleine couldn't hear the words, the threat in the man's posture was clear. Without thinking, Madeleine rushed from her room and down the back stairs, emerging into the alley just as the man raised his hand to strike. "Stop," she commanded, her voice ringing with the authority she had been taught to project as a lady of good breeding. Both figures froze, turning to her in surprise. "Miss Turner," the bartender said, dropping his hand. "This doesn't concern you." "I believe it does," Madeleine countered, moving to stand beside the frightened girl. "As the hostess of this establishment, the welfare of all who work here is my concern." The bartender's expression darkened. "You don't understand how things work here yet, miss. This girl was caught stealing." "I wasn't," the young woman protested, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just keeping the money I earned last night. Mr. Simmons said I could have it." "Mr. Simmons doesn't make those decisions," the bartender growled. "Mr. Turner does, and he says all money comes to the house first." Madeleine's confusion must have shown on her face, because the bartender smiled unpleasantly. "Ask your uncle about the contracts all the girls sign, Miss Turner. Ask him about the room and board charges and the fees for dresses and makeup. Ask him how much these girls actually get to keep of what they earn." "That's enough, Harris." The new voice belonged to her uncle, who had appeared at the alley entrance. Lawrence Turner's face was a mask of controlled anger. "Go back inside," he ordered the bartender, who slunk away without another word. To the girl, he said, "You too, Ruby. We'll discuss your behavior later." Ruby hurried past him, fear evident in every line of her body. Lawrence turned his attention to Madeleine. "I'm disappointed, niece. Your first day here, and already you're interfering in matters you don't understand." "He was going to hit her," Madeleine said, standing her ground. "Over money she earned." Lawrence sighed, his anger seeming to dissipate. "Harris is overzealous, I'll grant you that. But Ruby signed a contract agreeing to certain terms. The girls are paid fairly, but after their debts are settled." "Debts? Many come to us desperate, owing money elsewhere," Lawrence explained, his tone reasonable. "We pay those debts, provide housing, clothing, protection. In return, they work for us until they've repaid what we've invested in them. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." It sounded plausible, and yet the fear in Ruby's eyes suggested something darker. Still, Madeleine was in no position to challenge her uncle further, not yet. Not when she herself had signed a contract she barely understood. "I see," she said, though she didn't, not really. "Good." Lawrence's smile returned. "Now, Victor tells me you've accepted an invitation from Sheriff Price for Sunday." "Yes, to church and the town social. I thought it would be a good opportunity to meet people." Lawrence studied her for a moment. "Very well. It might actually be useful to have connections beyond the Starlight. But remember, Maddie, you represent me now, and you've signed a contract." The reminder sent a chill through her. What exactly had she agreed to? Sunday morning arrived bright and clear. Madeleine had spent the intervening days observing the Starlight's operations and growing increasingly concerned about what she had committed herself to. The girls, some barely older than she was, worked long hours, seemed perpetually in debt to her uncle, and were clearly afraid of the consequences of displeasing him. Yet she had found no opportunity to speak with any of them privately. Someone was always watching Victor, Harris, or one of the other staff members who reported directly to Lawrence. Even Betsy, who brought Madeleine's meals, was reluctant to talk beyond the most basic pleasantries. When Colt arrived to escort her to church, Madeleine was waiting eagerly, dressed in her Sunday best, a simple blue dress that had belonged to her mother. It was modest compared to the new gowns that had begun arriving from Mrs. Holloway, with their daring necklines and tight bodices. "Miss Turner," Colt greeted her, hat in hand. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Sheriff Price. And please, call me Madeleine." "Colt, then," he replied with a warm smile that transformed his serious face. Lawrence watched their departure from the saloon doorway, his expression unreadable. As they walked toward the small white church at the end of the main street, Madeleine felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you for the invitation," she said. "I felt rather confined these past few days." Colt glanced at her sharply. "Your uncle keeping you under lock and key?" "Not exactly, but I'm beginning to wonder what I've gotten myself into." She hesitated, then added, "The contract I signed, I'm not sure I fully understood the terms." "What contract?" Colt asked, stopping to face her. "What did Turner have you sign?" "An employment contract. 5 years as the Starlight's hostess. I was desperate after my parents died, and when Uncle Lawrence offered me a position." She trailed off, seeing the grim expression settling over Colt's features. "Turner has a habit of binding people to him through contracts they don't understand," he said quietly. "The girls who work for him, suppliers, even some of the townsfolk who borrowed money from him." "Like Ruby?" Madeleine asked, remembering the frightened girl from the alley. Colt's eyes narrowed. "What do you know about Ruby?" Madeleine told him about the incident she'd witnessed, and Colt's jaw tightened. "Ruby came here 2 years ago, 16, and alone. Her father had gambled away their farm and then abandoned her. Turner offered her work, paid off her father's debts, and now she'll likely never be free of him. But that's indentured servitude at best. Slavery at worst. But it's all legal because of those contracts." Colt's voice was bitter. "I've tried to build a case against him, but the girls won't testify. They're too afraid, and without their statements, I can't prove anything." They had reached the church steps, and Madeleine was acutely aware of curious glances from the townspeople gathered outside. "We should continue this conversation later," Colt said, his expression softening. "For now, let me introduce you to some good people." The church service was a balm to Madeleine's troubled spirit. The simple hymns and straightforward sermon reminded her of Sundays with her parents, a time that now seemed impossibly distant. After the service, the congregation moved to a nearby meadow where tables had been set up for the social. Colt introduced her to what seemed like the entire town: the blacksmith and his wife, the schoolteacher, the general store owner, ranchers, and farmers. Everyone was curious about the new arrival, especially one who was related to Lawrence Turner, but they were welcoming nonetheless. "Don't let them overwhelm you," Colt said as they finally found a moment alone, sharing a plate of fried chicken and biscuits at the edge of the gathering. "Small towns run on gossip, but these are good people at heart. They seem to respect you a great deal," Madeleine observed. "How long have you been sheriff?" 3 years, Colt replied. "Before that, I rode with the Rangers in Texas, and before that." He shrugged. "I wondered. Never found a place that felt like home until Willow Creek. And now you're determined to protect it, even from my uncle?" Colt met her gaze directly. "Especially from your uncle. Lawrence Turner came to town 5 years ago, bought the old saloon, and transformed it into the Starlight. At first, folks were pleased it brought money and visitors to Willow Creek. But then he started expanding his interests, buying up properties, extending loans with terms that ensured he'd eventually own even more." "And the girls?" Madeleine asked quietly. "That came later. At first, the Starlight was just a saloon and gaming house. Then came the entertainment. Now half the buildings on Main Street belong to him in one way or another, and too many people are in his debt. Including me, it seems," Madeleine said, a heaviness settling in her chest. "You said you signed a 5-year contract?" Do you have a copy? She shook her head. Uncle Lawrence kept the papers. He said it was standard practice. I'm sure he did, Colt muttered. Madeleine, be careful. Whatever the contract says, Turner will interpret it to his advantage. What can I do? I have nowhere else to go, no money. We'll figure something out, Colt promised, covering her hand with his own. The touch was warm, reassuring, and Madeleine felt a flicker of hope for the first time since arriving in Willow Creek. Their moment was interrupted by the approach of a smartly dressed woman in her 40s. Sheriff Price, she greeted them with a warm smile. Aren't you going to introduce me to your companion? Colt stood, smiling genuinely. Mrs. Randall, this is Miss Madeleine Turner, newly arrived from Boston. Madeleine, Mrs. Eleanor Randall owns the boarding house and is the closest thing Willow Creek has to town royalty. You flatter me, Sheriff, Eleanor said with a laugh. Miss Turner, it's a pleasure to meet you. I understand you're Lawrence Turner's niece. Yes, madam, Madeleine confirmed. I've come to work at the Starlight. Eleanor's smile dimmed slightly. I see. Well, if you ever need anything at all, my door is always open to young women in this town. There was a deeper meaning to the words, and Madeleine nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mrs. Randall. I appreciate that. As Eleanor moved on to greet other guests, Madeleine turned to Colt. She seemed to have a strong reaction to learning where I work. Mrs. Randall has helped more than one girl escape from your uncle's contracts, Colt said quietly. She's a woman of means and principle her late husband left her well provided for, and she uses that position to do good where she can. The afternoon continued pleasantly, but as the sun began to lower, Madeleine knew she needed to return to the Starlight. Her debut as hostess was scheduled for the following evening, and she had fittings and rehearsals planned. As Colt walked her back toward town, they took a longer route, extending their time together. There was something about the sheriff that made Madeleine feel safe, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the uncertainty she'd felt since arriving in Willow Creek. Thank you for today, she said as they neared the Starlight. It was exactly what I needed. Will Turner let you attend church regularly? Or the Ladies' Aid Society meetings? Mrs. Randall mentioned they could use someone with your education to help teach reading at the orphanage. I don't know, Madeleine admitted. The contract mentions my duties at the Starlight, but surely it can't prevent me from participating in community activities on my free time. Don't be so sure, Colt warned. Your uncle's contracts are notoriously comprehensive. They had reached the side entrance to the Starlight, and Madeleine hesitated, reluctant to go back inside to the watchful eyes and whispers. Colt, there you are, Maddie. Lawrence appeared in the doorway, his smile fixed. I was beginning to worry. Thank you for escorting my niece, Sheriff, but she has a busy evening ahead preparing for tomorrow's event. Of course, Colt replied, his expression neutral. Thank you for allowing her to join us today, Turner. Families should participate in community events, Lawrence said smoothly. Though I fear Maddie's schedule may not permit regular attendance. Come, niece. With a last glance at Colt, Madeleine followed her uncle inside. Lawrence's pleasant demeanor vanished as soon as the door closed behind them. I hope you enjoyed your little outing, he said coldly. Because it will be some time before you have another. What do you mean? Madeleine asked, alarm rising. I mean, my dear niece, that you seem to be forgetting the terms of our agreement. Lawrence reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a copy of the contract she had signed. Paragraph 7 clearly states that all social engagements must be approved in advance, and only those that benefit the Starlight will be permitted during the first year of your employment. But surely church is a distraction from your primary duties, Lawrence interrupted. And Sheriff Price is most definitely a distraction. Need I remind you of the penalty clauses for breach of contract? Madeleine hadn't read those clauses carefully enough, distracted as she'd been by the generous salary figures. Now Lawrence pointed them out, financial penalties that would effectively wipe out any earnings she might accumulate, extending the contract term for repeated infractions, and most alarmingly, a clause stating that any debts incurred would convert to alternative service at the Starlight. The implication was clear. If she violated the contract severely enough, she could find herself in the same position as Ruby and the other girls. You wouldn't, she whispered, horrified. I'm your niece, your blood. Blood means little in business, Maddie, Lawrence said, his tone almost regretful. I had hoped you would embrace your role here willingly, become my partner in expanding the Starlight. You have the education, the manners, the connections in the East that could prove valuable. Connections? Lawrence waved a dismissive hand. A matter for another time. For now, you will focus on your debut tomorrow evening. Mrs. Holloway has delivered your gowns, and Victor will brief you on the guests of special interest. Madeleine felt trapped, the walls of her small room closing in as she realized the extent of her uncle's control. That night, she barely slept, turning over possible escapes in her mind. But with no money, no connections in Willow Creek beyond the brief acquaintances she'd made at the social, and the threatening clauses of the contract hanging over her, she saw no immediate way out. The next evening arrived all too quickly. Mrs. Holloway helped Madeleine into the first of her new gowns, an emerald green satin that clung to her figure and displayed more of her bosom than she had ever shown in public. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style, with emerald combs that her uncle had provided. "You look magnificent," Lawrence declared when she descended to the main floor. "Every inch the lady, but with just the right touch of allure. Our guests will be enchanted." The Starlight had been transformed for the occasion. Fresh flowers adorned every table, the crystal chandeliers gleamed with new candles, and the piano player was dressed in formal attire. The regular girls wore matching gowns in various jewel tones, creating a coordinated tableau. "Remember," Victor instructed her quietly, "your role is to make our special guests feel welcome, distinguished. Laugh at their jokes, express interest in their businesses, and direct any specific inquiries about investments to Mr. Turner." Madeleine nodded, feeling like an actress stepping onto a stage in a role she hadn't rehearsed. As guests began to arrive, wealthy ranchers, mine owners, merchants from neighboring towns, even a judge from the territorial capital, she played her part with the social grace her mother had instilled in her. But beneath the smiles and pleasant conversation, she was constantly aware of Victor or Lawrence watching her, guiding her from one important guest to another, ensuring she said and did exactly what was expected. Midway through the evening, a hush fell over the saloon as the batwing doors swung open to admit Sheriff Colt Price. He was dressed more formally than Madeleine had seen him before, in a clean black coat and string tie, his badge gleaming on his chest. "Sheriff," Lawrence greeted him, surprise evident in his voice. "I don't believe you were on our guest list tonight." "Just making my rounds, Turner," Colt replied, his eyes finding Madeleine across the room. "Checking that everything's in order with so many important folks in town." Madeleine wanted to go to him, to escape the cloud of cologne and whiskey that surrounded the mine owner currently monopolizing her attention, but Victor appeared at her side, a warning hand on her arm. "Mr. Hargrove was just telling you about his new silver strike," Victor prompted, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Yes, how fascinating," Madeleine forced herself to say, though her attention remained on Colt, who was now engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with her uncle near the bar. The evening dragged on, a blur of faces and names and thinly veiled propositions from men who clearly didn't believe her role was limited to polite conversation. By the time the last guest departed, Madeleine was exhausted, her face aching from maintaining a pleasant expression for hours. "A successful debut," Lawrence declared, counting the night's earnings. "You did well, Maddie. With a few adjustments, you'll be perfect." "Adjustments?" she asked warily. "You spent too much time with Hargrove. He's already interested in investing. Focus more on the reluctant ones next time. And when Judge Benton asks you to accompany him to dinner next week, you'll accept." "Uncle Lawrence, I don't think. It's not about what you think," Lawrence cut her off, his affable mask slipping. "It's about what you agreed to in your contract. Paragraph 12 clearly states that you will entertain business associates as directed." "Entertain doesn't mean, it means exactly what I say it means," Lawrence snapped. "Judge Benton controls mining rights in the territory. His goodwill is essential to our expansion plans." Madeleine felt ill. "You expect me to encourage his attentions? I expect you to fulfill your contract." Lawrence's tone softened slightly. "Maddie, this is business. You're not one of the girls. Your virtue remains your own. But your charm, your conversation, your company, those belong to the Starlight now. To me." As Madeleine climbed the stairs to her room, The full reality of her situation crashed down upon her. She wasn't just a hostess. She was bait, a lure to bring wealthy, influential men into her uncle's sphere so he could exploit them. And according to the contract she had signed so trustingly, she had no say in the matter for 5 long years. The following days settled into a pattern. During daylight hours, Madeleine was given limited freedom to move about the Starlight, always under the watchful eye of Victor or one of the other staff. In the evenings, she presided over the main saloon in her fine gowns, playing the role of the cultured hostess while steering clear of the rooms upstairs where other transactions took place. She did not see Colt again, though she often looked for him when she had a chance to glance out the windows. Lawrence had made it clear that any contact with the sheriff would be considered a serious breach of contract, and after seeing what happened to Ruby when she defied the rules, a public beating followed by assignment to the worst customers, Madeleine was afraid to test her uncle's resolve. A week after her debut, Judge Benton returned to the Starlight, specifically requesting Madeleine's company. Lawrence was delighted, instructing her to be especially attentive to the judge, a corpulent man in his 60s with wandering hands and sour breath. A private dinner has been arranged in the back parlor, Lawrence told her. The judge enjoys intelligent conversation almost as much as he enjoys looking at a beautiful woman. Madeleine steeled herself for an unpleasant evening, but when she entered the parlor, she found not only Judge Benton but also Sheriff Price, the 2 men engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. "Ah, the lovely Miss Turner," Benton said, rising from his seat with surprising agility for a man of his size. "Your uncle promised me the pleasure of your exclusive company, but the sheriff here seems to think I need supervision." "Just doing my job, Judge," Colt said evenly, his eyes meeting Madeleine's with concern. "Making sure all our visitors to Willow Creek are safe and satisfied." The double meaning wasn't lost on Madeleine, who felt a surge of gratitude for Colt's unexpected presence. "Well, I'm certain Miss Turner is perfectly capable of entertaining me without your assistance," Benton said dismissively. "Run along, Sheriff. Surely there's a stray dog or a drunk cowboy requiring your attention elsewhere." "Actually," Colt replied, not moving from his seat, "I received a specific request to ensure the judge's welfare tonight. Territorial governor's orders. Seems there have been threats against officials lately." It was a transparent lie, but Benton couldn't openly challenge it without risking offense to his superior. The judge's face reddened with suppressed anger. "Fine," he snapped, "but I expect a refund from Turner for this." Diminished experience. Throughout the uncomfortable dinner that followed, Colt maintained a protective presence, skillfully inserting himself into conversations whenever Benton's comments veered toward impropriety. By the end of the meal, the judge was fuming, and when Lawrence arrived to check on his important guest, Benton stormed out without a backward glance. "What have you done?" Lawrence demanded, rounding on Colt once Benton was gone. "Do you have any idea how important the judge is to our operations?" "Just preventing a situation that might reflect poorly on your establishment, Turner," Colt replied calmly. "Judge Benton has a reputation for getting overly familiar with young ladies after a few drinks. Wouldn't want anything to happen to your niece, would you?" Lawrence's face contorted with rage, but he controlled himself visibly. "Get out, Price. And don't think I don't know what you're trying to do." "I'm not trying to do anything except uphold the law," Colt said, rising. To Madeleine, he added more softly, "Good evening, Miss Turner. I hope we'll meet again soon under better circumstances." When Colt had gone, Lawrence turned his anger on Madeleine. "Did you arrange this? Did you send for him?" "No. I had no idea he would be here. I haven't spoken to the sheriff since the social." Lawrence studied her face, apparently deciding she was telling the truth. "Price has been a thorn in my side since he became sheriff. Always interfering, always watching. He's convinced himself I'm breaking the law, but he can't prove anything because I'm smarter than he is." "What laws would those be, Uncle?" Madeleine asked, unable to keep a note of challenge from her voice. Lawrence's eyes narrowed. "Legal contracts freely entered into are not against the law, Maddie. Remember that. Now, go to your room. Thanks to Price, this evening has been a complete waste." But as Madeleine climbed the stairs, she didn't feel that the evening had been wasted at all. Colt's unexpected intervention had saved her from whatever Benton had planned, and more importantly, It had shown her that she wasn't entirely alone in Willow Creek. The following morning, a note was delivered to Madeleine's room along with her breakfast tray. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and there was no signature, but the message was clear. Noon. Back of the general store. Come alone if you can. It had to be from Colt, Madeleine thought, heart racing. But how could she get away from the Starlight unsupervised? Lawrence had tightened restrictions since the incident with the judge, insisting that Victor or another trusted employee accompany her whenever she left her room. Fortune favored her, however. At 11:30, a delivery of expensive liquor arrived, and in the confusion of checking the inventory, she was able to slip out the back door unnoticed. Moving quickly down alleys rather than the main street to avoid being seen, she made her way to the general store. Colt was waiting behind the building, his expression lighting with relief when he saw her. You came. I wasn't sure you'd be able to get away. Neither was I, Madeleine admitted. What's happened? Why did you need to see me? I've been looking into your uncle's contracts, Colt said, glancing around to ensure they weren't observed. There might be a way to invalidate yours. Turner's been operating in a legal gray area for years, but if we can prove certain clauses are unconscionable, what does that mean exactly? It means so unjust or one-sided that no reasonable person would agree to them if they fully understood. The judge might have been useful if he wasn't so deep in your uncle's pocket. Colt ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I need to see your exact contract, Madeleine. Do you know where Turner keeps the papers? In his office, I think. There's a safe behind the painting of the mountain landscape. She hesitated. But I don't have the combination, and the office is always locked when he's not there. Leave that to me, Colt said grimly. I've been building a case against Turner for months. If I can add your testimony about how you were pressured into signing without fully understanding the terms, Sheriff Price. The call came from the front of the store, and Colt tensed, pushing Madeleine gently behind a stack of crates. Stay here, he whispered. He moved toward the voice, and Madeleine heard a brief conversation about a disturbance at the saloon 2 doors down. When Colt returned, his expression was urgent. I have to go. Listen carefully, Turner is planning something big. There's a man arriving on tomorrow's stage, a banker from Chicago named Hoffman. From what I've heard, your uncle plans to use you to help secure a major loan for expanding the Starlight into a full hotel and gambling house. Use me? How? Colt's jaw tightened. Hoffman is a widower in his 40s. Rumor is he's looking to remarry, preferably someone young and beautiful from a good family. Madeleine felt the blood drain from her face. My uncle wouldn't, he couldn't possibly expect me to. I wouldn't put anything past Lawrence Turner, Colt said grimly. Be careful, Madeleine. Don't sign anything else, no matter what he tells you. I'll find a way to help you, I promise. He hesitated, then quickly pulled her into an embrace. The contact was brief but powerful, his arms strong and sure around her. When he released her, his eyes held emotions she hadn't seen before. Concern, certainly, but something deeper as well. Go back before you're missed, he said softly, and know that you're not alone. Madeleine slipped back into the Starlight unnoticed, her mind reeling from Colt's warning. Would her uncle really try to match her with this banker from Chicago? The thought made her physically ill, yet it aligned with everything she had observed about Lawrence Turner's business methods. People were commodities to him, assets to be leveraged for profit. That evening, her suspicions were confirmed when Lawrence summoned her to his office. Excellent news, Maddie, he announced, pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey. An old business associate of mine arrives tomorrow, Edwin Hoffman, president of the Midwest Banking Corporation. He'll be staying with us for a week to discuss financing our expansion. I see, Madeleine said carefully. And what will my role be in these discussions? Lawrence smiled, a calculating expression that didn't reach his eyes. Why? To charm him, of course. Hoffman is a cultured man who appreciates beauty and refinement. You will accompany him to dinner each evening, show him around Willow Creek, make him feel welcome. Is that all? Lawrence's smile tightened. For now, but I should mention that Hoffman is seeking a wife. His first died 2 years ago, leaving him quite wealthy but lonely. A man in his position needs a suitable partner, someone who understands society and can help him entertain important clients. And you think I might be that someone? Madeleine asked, unable to keep the horror from her voice. It would be an advantageous match, Lawrence said smoothly. Hoffman could provide you with security, position, all the things a young woman desires. And naturally, as your guardian, I would ensure the marriage settlement included favorable terms for future business between the Starlight and his bank. I have no interest in marrying a stranger for your financial benefit, Uncle Lawrence. Lawrence's affable expression disappeared. Your interest is irrelevant. Your contract cannot possibly require me to marry someone. No, Lawrence conceded. But it does require you to fulfill your duties as hostess in whatever manner best serves the Starlight's interests. Failure to do so would trigger the penalty clauses. And with no funds of your own, how would you pay those penalties, I wonder? The threat hung in the air between them. Madeleine thought of Ruby and the other girls, trapped in service to pay off ever-increasing debts. You're a businessman, Uncle, she said, trying a different approach. Surely you can see that forcing me into an unwanted marriage would bring scrutiny from the authorities. Sheriff Price already watches your operations closely. At the mention of Colt, Lawrence's expression darkened further. Price is a minor irritation, nothing more. As for authorities, Judge Benton is a close personal friend. Who exactly do you think would intervene on your behalf? Madeleine had no answer. She was trapped, caught in a web of legal documents she had foolishly signed without understanding. Get some rest, Lawrence said, his tone softening slightly. Hoffman arrives at noon tomorrow. I want you looking your best. Back in her room, Madeleine paced frantically, searching for a way out. She could run, try to reach Mrs. Randall or Colt for help, but with no money and nowhere to hide, how far would she get? And what would happen if she were caught? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it cautiously, she found Betsy standing there with an evening tray. Mr. Turner thought you might prefer to dine in your room tonight, Betsy explained, setting the tray on the small table. As she arranged the dishes, she whispered, "The sheriff asked me to tell you to be ready at dawn. East window." Before Madeleine could ask for clarification, Betsy was gone, leaving her with renewed hope, but also confusion. Ready for what? And how was she supposed to escape through a window 2 stories above the ground? She barely slept that night, alternating between watching the window and packing a small bag with her few personal possessions, the locket containing her parents' miniatures, her mother's prayer book, and the little money she had brought from Boston. The fine gowns her uncle had provided remained hanging in the wardrobe. She wanted nothing from him. Just before dawn, a pebble struck her window. When she looked out, she saw Colt in the alley below, holding a coil of rope. He motioned for her to open the window, then skillfully tossed the rope up to her. "Tie it to the bedpost," he called softly. "I'll help you down." Madeleine worked quickly, securing the rope as instructed. She slung her small bag across her body, took a deep breath, and began the terrifying descent. The rope burned her palms, but Colt's strong hands guided her the last few feet to the ground. "We have to hurry," he whispered, leading her deeper into the alley. "Turner usually rises at 6, and we need to be well away by then." "Where are we going?" "Mrs. Randall's first. She's prepared a room for you, somewhere Turner won't think to look." They moved silently through the awakening town, keeping to back ways and shadows. The boarding house was on the edge of town, a large, well-maintained building with a neat garden. Mrs. Randall herself opened the door at Colt's quiet knock. "Come in quickly," she urged, ushering them inside. "The room's ready, and no one saw you, I trust." "We were careful," Colt assured her. To Madeleine, he explained, "Mrs. Randall has agreed to hide you while I take legal steps to challenge your contract. It won't be comfortable, you'll need to stay out of sight, but you'll be safe." "Thank you both," Madeleine said fervently. "But what about my uncle? When he discovers I'm gone, let me worry about Lawrence Turner," Colt said grimly. "I've been building a case against him for months. Your testimony could be the key to finally bringing him to justice." Mrs. Randall showed Madeleine to a small but comfortable room at the back of the house, with curtained windows and a door that locked from the inside. "No one will know you're here except Colt and myself," she promised. "Rest now. You've had a trying time." When they were alone, Colt took Madeleine's hands, examining the rope burns on her palms with concern. "I'll bring some salve for these later," he said softly. "Colt, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't warned me about Hoffman, I couldn't let Turner sell you into a marriage of convenience," Colt said, his voice rough with emotion. Not when he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Not when what? Madeleine prompted gently. Colt's eyes met hers, intense and sincere. Not when I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. The admission sent a wave of warmth through Madeleine. In the short time she'd known him, Colt Price had shown himself to be everything her uncle was not: honorable, compassionate, protective without being controlling. I think perhaps I've been falling in love with you too, she whispered, and was rewarded with a smile that transformed his serious face. Colt leaned forward, his intention clear, but he hesitated, giving her the choice. Madeleine closed the distance between them, meeting his lips in a kiss that felt like a promise. It was brief but powerful, and when they parted, she saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. I have to go, he said reluctantly. Turner will be raising the alarm soon, and I need to be seen around town, acting normally. Be careful, Madeleine urged. My uncle is dangerous when crossed. So am I, Colt replied with grim determination. Rest now. I'll return this evening with news. The day passed slowly for Madeleine, confined to her small room with only her thoughts and fears for company. Mrs. Randall brought meals and reassurance, reporting that Lawrence Turner had indeed discovered her absence and was in a towering rage, offering a substantial reward for information leading to her return. The sheriff is playing his part perfectly, Mrs. Randall said, pretending to organize a search while actually misdirecting Turner's men. No one will think to look for you here. When Colt returned that evening, his expression was both triumphant and concerned. I managed to get into Turner's office during the commotion over your disappearance, he told Madeleine. Found your contract in the safe, along with several others. As I suspected, the terms are legally questionable at best, outright criminal at worst. Can it be invalidated? Madeleine asked hopefully. I believe so, especially with your testimony about how you were pressured into signing without understanding the terms. But Turner won't give up easily. He's convinced you've been kidnapped or that I've helped you escape, which is closer to the truth. He's appealed to Judge Benton for a search warrant for every building in town. Will the judge grant it? Probably. They're thick as thieves, but Mrs. Randall has prepared for that possibility. There's a hidden room behind the pantry, used during the war to shelter escaped slaves. You'll be safe there if searchers come. Madeleine shivered at the thought of being found and returned to her uncle's control. How long must I hide? I can't impose on Mrs. Randall indefinitely. Just until I can get your case before a circuit judge who isn't in Turner's pocket, Colt assured her. I've sent telegrams to the territorial capital. With luck, we'll have a response within days. But luck was not on their side. The following morning, Colt arrived at the boarding house in a state of barely controlled fury. Turner's men intercepted my telegrams, he reported. And Judge Benton has issued not just search warrants, but also an order for your return to your uncle's custody, citing your contract as legal justification. What do we do now? Madeleine asked, panic rising. We need to get you out of town, Colt decided. Mrs. Randall has relatives in Denver. If we can get you there, Denver is 4 days hard ride, Mrs. Randall objected. And Turner's men will be watching all the roads. Not all of them, Colt said grimly. There's an old mining trail through the high country. Difficult terrain, but Turner's men won't think to look there. I can get Madeleine to Denver, then return to face whatever charges Turner tries to bring against me. No, Madeleine protested. I won't let you risk your position, your freedom, for me. Colt took her hands gently. Madeleine, I've been fighting against Turner's corruption since I became sheriff. This is about more than just you or me. It's about justice for everyone he's exploited. But yes, he added softly, it's also about you. I won't let him cage you again. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. This man, who barely knew her, was willing to risk everything to help her. In that moment, the feelings that had been growing since their first meeting crystallized into certainty. She loved him. When do we leave? She asked, her decision made. Tonight, after dark. Mrs. Randall will help you prepare. Pack light, will be traveling fast. That evening, dressed in borrowed men's clothing that would allow her to ride astride, Madeleine met Colt at the small stable behind the boarding house. 2 horses were saddled and ready, loaded with minimal supplies. The search parties are concentrating on the south and east roads, Colt told her as he helped her mount. We'll head north initially, then cut west into the mountains. Mrs. Randall pressed a small bundle into Madeline's hands. Food for the journey, and a little money. Go with God, my dear. With tears in her eyes, Madeline thanked the older woman for her kindness. Then, following Colt's lead, she guided her horse quietly through the darkened streets of Willow Creek, every shadow seeming to hold potential danger. They had almost reached the edge of town when a voice called out from the darkness. That's far enough, Price. Lawrence Turner stepped into the path, a shotgun leveled at Colt's chest. Behind him, Victor and Harris emerged from the shadows, similarly armed. Uncle Lawrence, Madeline gasped. Did you really think you could steal my property and escape unpunished, Sheriff? Lawrence asked, his voice cold with rage. Kidnapping, theft, abuse of authority, the list of charges against you grows by the hour. The only criminal here is you, Turner. Colt replied steadily, his hand not moving toward his own weapon. Trapping women in contracts they don't understand. Using debt to create virtual slaves. Legal contracts, freely signed, Lawrence countered. Which reminds me, Maddie, you're in breach of contract, my dear. The penalties are quite severe, as you know. I was coerced, Madeline said firmly. I didn't understand what I was signing, and you know it. Lawrence laughed without humor. Prove it. Oh, wait, you can't, because the contract clearly states that you acknowledged understanding all terms. Your signature is on every page. We have testimony from other women you've trapped, Colt said. Ruby has agreed to speak out, along with 3 others. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Lawrence's face, but he recovered quickly. The word of a few fallen women against a respected businessman? I think not. Now dismount, both of you. Victor, relieve the sheriff of his weapon. As Victor approached, Madeline saw Colt's muscles tense, ready to fight despite the odds. If he did, he would surely be shot. Wait, she cried desperately. Uncle Lawrence, I'll come back willingly. I'll fulfill my contract, entertain your banker friend, whatever you want. Just let Sheriff Price go unharmed. Madeline, no, Colt began, but Lawrence cut him off. A noble offer, niece, but I'm afraid the sheriff has caused me too much trouble to simply walk away. However, I am a reasonable man. Return to the Starlight now, and I'll see that Price receives a fair trial before Judge Benton. Resist, and he dies here. It was no choice at all. Madeline couldn't let Colt die for trying to help her. With a heart like lead, she guided her horse forward. I'll go with you, she said quietly. But please, give me a moment to say goodbye. Lawrence hesitated, then nodded curtly. 1 minute. Victor, keep your gun on Price. Madeline dismounted and moved to Colt's side. His eyes were anguished as she reached up to touch his face. Don't do this, he whispered. He'll never let you go. I can't let him kill you, she replied softly. Find another way, Colt. I believe in you. Impulsively, she pulled his head down and kissed him, pouring all her feelings into that brief contact. When they parted, she saw resolve harden in his eyes. I'll find you, he promised. No matter what. How touching, Lawrence sneered. Victor, escort my niece back to the Starlight. Harris and I will deal with the sheriff. No, Madeline protested. You promised he would have a trial. And so he shall, Lawrence assured her, though his eyes told a different story. Victor now. As Victor took her arm, Madeline looked back at Colt, memorizing his face, fearing it might be the last time she saw him alive. He stood tall and unbowed, even in defeat, and that image stayed with her as she was led back through the darkened streets to the prison she had so briefly escaped. Back at the Starlight, Lawrence had her locked in a different room, a small chamber with barred windows on the 3rd floor, previously used for storage. A narrow bed, a washstand, and a chamber pot were its only furnishings. You'll remain here until I decide what to do with you, Lawrence informed her coldly. Your actions have cost me dearly. Hoffman left this morning when you weren't present to entertain him. The penalties in your contract for such a breach are severe. What have you done with Sheriff Price? Madeline demanded, fear for Colt overriding concern for her own situation. The sheriff is no longer your concern, Lawrence replied, his expression unreadable. Rest assured, he won't be interfering in my business again. With that ominous statement, he left, locking the door behind him. Alone in the bare room, Madeline gave in to the tears she had been holding back. Had Lawrence killed Colt? The thought was unbearable, yet she could think of no other interpretation for his words. Hours passed, then days. Meals were brought by a stone-faced Harris, who refused to answer any of her questions. From her high window, Madeleine could see a portion of the main street, but there was no sign of Colt. The sheriff's office appeared closed, the blinds drawn. On the third day of her confinement, Madeleine heard raised voices from the street below. Looking out, she saw a group of townspeople gathered outside the Starlight, led by Mrs. Randall and the blacksmith. Even from a distance, their angry expressions were clear. Minutes later, Lawrence burst into her room, his face contorted with rage. "What have you done?" he demanded. "Half the town is outside demanding your release." "I've done nothing," Madeleine replied truthfully. "I've been locked in this room, as you know." "Price," Lawrence spat. "It has to be Price. Somehow he's turned the town against me." Hope surged in Madeleine's heart. "Then Colt is alive." Lawrence's expression confirmed it before he could control his reaction. "Not for much longer. Judge Benton has issued a warrant for his arrest on multiple charges." "When he's found?" "You mean if he's found," Madeleine countered, her spirits lifting for the first time in days. "Colt knows this territory better than your men ever will." A commotion from downstairs interrupted them, shouting, the crash of breaking glass, heavy footsteps on the stairs. "Turner," a voice bellowed. "Show yourself." Lawrence's face paled. Drawing his pistol, he grabbed Madeleine's arm, pulling her in front of him just as the door burst open to reveal the blacksmith and several other men. "Stay back," Lawrence warned, pressing the gun to Madeleine's temple, "or my niece will suffer for your interference." The men halted, uncertainty replacing their righteous anger. Behind them, Mrs. Randall appeared, her expression hardening at the sight of Lawrence using Madeleine as a shield. "This is a private business matter," Lawrence told them, edging toward the door with Madeleine still in his grip. "My niece signed a contract and is merely fulfilling her obligations." "We've heard about your contracts, Turner," the blacksmith growled. "Heard how you trap folks in debt they can never repay. It ends now." "Does it?" Lawrence asked with a strained laugh. "And who exactly will stop me? Your precious sheriff is a fugitive. Judge Benton supports me fully, and I own half the businesses in this town. Now move aside." The townspeople reluctantly parted, allowing Lawrence to back out of the room with Madeleine still held firmly against him. "We're leaving," he hissed in her ear. "I have business interests elsewhere. You'll fulfill your contract far from these interfering fools." He forced her down the back stairs and into the alley where a wagon waited, already loaded with trunks and crates he had been planning to flee. With the gun still pressed to her side, Lawrence compelled Madeleine to climb onto the wagon seat. "Drive," he ordered, keeping the weapon concealed but still trained on her. Madeleine took the reins, her mind racing. The townspeople would surely follow, but Lawrence was right. Without Colt or legal authority on their side, there was little they could actually do to stop him. She guided the wagon through back alleys to avoid the crowd at the front of the saloon, following Lawrence's terse directions. They were nearing the edge of town when a figure on horseback appeared in their path. Colt Price sat tall in the saddle, his expression grim, a rifle resting across his thighs. "That's far enough, Turner," he called. Lawrence cursed viciously, grabbing the reins from Madeleine with one hand while pressing the gun more firmly against her with the other. "Back off, Price, or she dies right here." "You won't shoot her," Colt said with certainty. "You need her alive to fulfill that contract. That precious contract that gives you power over her." "I need her cooperative, not necessarily unharmed," Lawrence countered. "A bullet in the shoulder would still leave her able to charm investors, just with a bit more sympathy value." Madeleine remained very still, weighing her options. Lawrence's attention was divided between her and Colt. Perhaps there was an opportunity in that split focus. "Let her go, Turner," Colt demanded. "It's over. Your girls have talked, Ruby, Betsy, all of them. Judge Benton may be in your pocket, but the territorial governor isn't. He's dispatched federal marshals. They'll be here by nightfall." Lawrence's grip on Madeleine tightened painfully. "You're lying." "Am I? Are you willing to bet your freedom on that?" Colt's voice was steady, confident. "Release Miss Turner and surrender yourself, and I'll testify that you cooperated." For a moment, Madeleine thought Lawrence might actually consider the offer. Then she felt him shift, sensed rather than saw him raising the gun toward Colt. Without conscious thought, she acted. Throwing her full weight sideways, she knocked Lawrence off balance. The gun fired, the shot going wild as they both tumbled from the wagon seat. Madeleine hit the ground hard, the impact driving the breath from her lungs. Lawrence recovered more quickly, scrambling to his feet and aiming the gun at her with murderous intent. "You'll regret that." Colt's rifle cracked, and Lawrence staggered, the pistol falling from his hand as he clutched his shoulder. Before he could recover, Colt was there, dismounting in a fluid motion and covering the distance between them in long strides. A swift punch to the jaw sent Lawrence crashing to the ground, unconscious. Madeleine. Colt was at her side in an instant, helping her to sit up, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "Just bruised, I think," she managed, still trying to catch her breath. "You're alive." "I thought when he said you wouldn't interfere again. Your uncle's men aren't as loyal as he thinks," Colt explained, his eyes never leaving her face. Harris decided he preferred a bribe to committing murder. "He let me go with a warning never to return to Willow Creek." "But you did return," Madeleine said softly, touching his cheek in wonder. "I promised I'd find you," Colt replied simply. "No matter what." From the direction of the Starlight came the sound of many voices and footsteps. The townspeople had realized something was happening and were coming to investigate. "Was it true?" Madeleine asked quickly. "About the federal marshals?" Colt smiled grimly. "Yes. I managed to get a telegram through to an old friend who serves as deputy marshal in Denver. He's bringing a circuit judge who isn't on Turner's payroll. They'll be here by evening." Relief washed over Madeleine in a dizzying wave. "It's really over then?" "Almost," Colt said, reaching into his pocket. From it, he withdrew a folded document that Madeleine recognized instantly: her contract with Lawrence. "Where did you get that?" "From your uncle's safe, the night you escaped," Colt explained. "I took it then, but with everything that happened, there wasn't time to show you." He held the contract out to her. "It's your life, Madeleine. Your choice what happens to it." With trembling hands, she took the papers, staring down at her signature on the final page. All the fear, the manipulation, the sense of being trapped, it was all contained in this document. "What should I do with it?" she asked softly. "Whatever you want," Colt replied. The marshals could use it as evidence against Turner, or he didn't finish the sentence, but Madeleine understood the alternative. With deliberate movements, she tore the contract down the middle, then into quarters, the sound of ripping paper oddly satisfying. "Now you're free," Colt said softly, his eyes shining with something that made her heart race. The approaching townspeople rounded the corner, led by Mrs. Randall and the blacksmith. They halted at the scene, before them Lawrence Turner unconscious on the ground, Colt and Madeleine close together, torn papers fluttering around them. "Sheriff?" the blacksmith called uncertainly. "Everything all right here?" "Everything's fine, Jim," Colt replied, not taking his eyes from Madeleine's face. "Mr. Turner will be spending some time in our jail awaiting the arrival of federal marshals. Would you and the others be good enough to escort him there?" As the townspeople moved to secure Lawrence, Colt helped Madeleine to her feet, still holding her hands in his. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "I have no contract, no position, nowhere to go." "You have choices," Colt assured her. "Mrs. Randall would welcome you at the boarding house. The schoolteacher mentioned needing an assistant." Or he hesitated, suddenly less certain than he had been, facing down her uncle with a rifle. "Or," Madeleine prompted, her heart quickening at the look in his eyes. "Or you could stay with me," Colt said simply. "Not at first, that wouldn't be proper. But eventually, if you felt the same way I do." He trailed off, and Madeleine realized with wonder that this strong, brave man was nervous, afraid of her rejection. "I believe I do feel the same way," she said softly. "I've known it since you risked everything to help me escape." Colt's smile was like the sunrise, transforming his serious face. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and kissed her. Unlike their desperate farewell kiss days earlier, this one was gentle, a promise of things to come. When they parted, the townspeople were pointedly looking elsewhere, though Mrs. Randall's smile was knowing. "I think I'll accept Mrs. Randall's hospitality for now," Madeleine decided, "and perhaps explore that teaching position. But I would very much like to continue seeing you, Sheriff Price." "I'd like that too, Miss Turner," Colt replied formally, though his eyes danced with happiness. Very much indeed. 6 months later, Madeleine stood in the small church of Willow Creek, wearing a simple white dress adorned with Mrs. Randall's lace veil. At her side was Colt, resplendent in a new black suit, his badge polished to a high shine for the occasion. The past months had been full of changes. Lawrence Turner had been convicted on multiple charges of fraud, extortion, and false imprisonment, sentenced to 15 years in a territorial prison. The Starlight had been sold, the proceeds divided among his victims, including Ruby and the other girls, many of whom had used the money to start new lives elsewhere. Madeleine had found her place in Willow Creek as assistant to the aging schoolteacher, discovering a talent for education that brought her genuine joy. She had also found a family in the townsfolk who had stood up for her against her uncle, particularly Mrs. Randall, who had become a surrogate mother. But most importantly, she had found love with Colt, whose quiet strength and unwavering honor had only deepened her feelings for him over the months of their courtship. As they exchanged vows before the packed church, Madeleine's thoughts briefly returned to that moment in the street when Colt had torn her contract and said those simple words, "Now you're free." He had given her the greatest gift possible, the freedom to choose her own path. And she had chosen him, not from obligation or necessity, but from love. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Colt kissed her with tender passion, Madeleine knew with absolute certainty that this was what true freedom felt like, not the absence of commitment, but the joy of choosing the right one. Outside the church, the entire town waited to celebrate with them. As they emerged into the bright sunlight, rice and flower petals showering down upon them, Colt leaned close to whisper in her ear, "Happy, Mrs. Price?" Madeleine looked up at her husband, at the love shining in his eyes, and felt her heart overflow with joy. "Completely," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him once more. "I've never been more free."